Ex-soldier Mason guards a journalist interviewing a president, only to find himself entangled in political intrigue, assassination attempts, and hidden enemies. Navigating a treacherous path, Mason seeks redemption and faces choices that impact him, the journalist, and the nation's future. Mason Podius acknowledges in the first scene that he was raised without a sense of direction in life. He felt he desired things that most people want and did things that most people do. Mason therefore made snap judgments. Mason made the decision to join the military and work as a special forces agent. Mason was thrilled that, with only a year remaining in law school, he had finally found his purpose. Mason and Jenny were married, and their daughter Casey was born. But in the process of trying to kill a guy called Venigus, Mason lost both his friends and his reason for being. Mason did not finish law school, but he left the army and went on to become a lawyer. Mason is now en route to Casey's school to deliver her. His daughter tells him about a child that persistently tries to get close to her. Mason gives his daughter instructions to strike the child in the neck if he tries to touch her once more before heading out to work. Sebastian Earle, an old acquaintance, stops into Mason's office after he drops Casey off. Sebastian is the owner of Contracted Defense Initiatives, or CDI as it is more often known. Mason is hired by Sebastian to watch after Clare Wellington, a journalist, as she goes to an exclusive interview with Punya President Venigus. Mason wants to say no since he remembers that Venigus was their goal before his friends passed away, but he finally accepts when Sebastian makes a sizable financial offer. That day, when Mason gets home, he finds out that Casey's principal called Jenny because his daughter had struck the boy who had attempted to touch her in the neck. Mason and Jenny argue as a consequence, which exacerbates their already problematic marriage. When Jenny finds out about the position Sebastian has given Mason, she becomes worried, but in the end, she chooses to let Mason leave because she believes that his leaving could be just what he needs to get well and find happiness again. Mason introduces himself to journalist Clare Wellington, and the two go straight to the airport. Mason is briefed by Clare on his responsibility to protect her at all costs. When they arrive, Venigus welcomes Clare while his security thoroughly searches Mason. Mason is shocked to learn that Venigus has done research on him and is aware that he was a former member of the armed forces as they get into Venigus's automobile. The security vehicle in front of them blows up as they are traveling over a bridge, and rebels waiting to kill Venigus assault them. Realizing that this is a premeditated coup, Venigus begs Mason to help him defend his people as Mason approaches the overturned security vehicle and draws a large pistol. Mason, however, objects, saying that the assassination attempt was made by Venigus's own personnel. They enter the bush and pause so Clare may have a nap before Clare walks away. Not long after they have followed, Venigus arrives. When Mason phones Sebastian for help, Sebastian tells him he knows where they are and will send a helicopter to get them. After the call, Venigus asks to use the phone, but Mason says no. Mason then draws a pistol and makes threats against Venigus, threatening to have him arrested for being a foreign spy. Mason is convinced to help Venigus by Clare, who intervenes. When Venigus phones George, his nephew, he surprises him by finding out that Venigus is still alive. Venigus tells him he's still okay, even though he knows he's the brains behind the coup. Clare expresses disbelief upon learning that Venigus's own nephew is involved with the rebels. However, Venigus counters that George is only being taken advantage of by the rebels due to his insanity. Venigus begs them to assist him in defending his people, but Mason and Clare turn to go, leaving Venigus alone himself. Mason is resolved not to help Venigus, despite Clare's best efforts to persuade him to do so that she may report everything. Clare can't figure out why Mason seems to be upset with Venigus. Mason understands they aren't going to aid them when he sees the helicopter taking off after dropping off two gunmen. They run from the shooters, who follow them as the helicopter shoots at them. They stop beside a fallen tree in the clearing, and Mason sets up a sniper to wait for the helicopter. Conversely, Clare takes a step back and documents everything. Mason snipes the pilot successfully, and they escape into the woods as the helicopter is about to crash. Clare doesn't stop running until she discovers Mason is gone. The two shooters approach her as she yells for Mason. She ducks behind a tree, holding onto a limb, and waits in silence for a rebel to come near the tree where she is hiding. Mason shows up out of the blue and fights the rebel. Clare observes as Mason strangles the rebel till he dies. Mason is standing in front of Clare as she comes out of hiding, but a rebel hits Mason in the head. When Venigus shows there, he shoots the rebel while they are stuck. An automobile arrives while George and his team are examining the damaged helicopter. Colonel Jan has shown here to inform Georgie that he was unable to kill Venigus. After Colonel Jan kills one of Georgie's troops, Georgie vows to atone. The three of them had stopped by the river to unwind for a while before heading back to Mason's group. Clare approaches Mason to strike up a conversation and finds out about his most recent journey. Mason informs Clare about his friend's deaths in the aircraft tragedy that occurred in the same region. Following a brief period of calm, Venigus takes Mason and Clare to a hamlet where he introduces them to Pino, the son-in-law of the local chief. The group chooses to spend the night in the village. Clare and Venigus agree to have an exclusive interview. They talk about Venigus's attempted assassination after taking a shower, and he explains why he thinks businesses are behind the attempt. Ponia's mineral and land treasures have been plundered by outsiders, and businesses have profited billions from them. In Ponia, lanthanides have recently been found. Businesses want to take advantage of this new resource because lanthanides, which are rare earth metals, are essential to all new technologies. However, Venigus declined, which is why they want for his demise. Mason, who has been recording the conversation, begins to come to the conclusion that Venigus isn't as bad as he first seems to be. The next morning, Mason awakens Clare and informs her that they are going and that she has to get ready. Conversely, Clare is apprehensive because she wants to know the whole story of the Ponian uprising. Mason is urged to remain and witness the truth by Venigus, who then reveals that he is aware of Mason's motivation for being sent to safeguard Clare. When Mason phones Sebastian, he finds out that Sebastian was instructed to send a guy to murder Venigus. Sebastian picked Mason because he reasoned that because Mason had caused his friends to lose their jobs, Mason would also wish to kill Venigus. Without saying anything else, Mason hangs up. Using his personal phone, he gives Jenny a call. He expresses his appreciation and devotion, and she asks him to get home safely. Following up with Venigus over the phone, Mason draws his revolver. Rather of killing Venigus and Clare, he just goes by, gathers his things, and tells Clare they're heading out. The gang runs away from Colonel Jan and his forces, but Venigus emerges from concealment when he sees the rebels advancing on the settlement. Clare convinces Mason to help Venigus in the meanwhile, pointing out that the colonel would surely murder the villagers after killing Venigus. Mason uses his horse to seize Venigus, and the two of them ride out of sight of the rebels. While Mason and Venigus escape, Clare is caught. Mason and Venigus make the decision to put Clare's needs first after realizing they are powerless against Colonel Jan and his rebels. After spending the night in a church, the two go to see Bobby, a reliable friend of Venigus, and seek for his help. After talking with Bobby the next day, Mason leaves to meet with Colonel Jan, leaving Venigus concealed. With their rifles leveled at one another, Mason and Colonel Jan stand in the center of what seems to be a quiet hamlet. Clare is forced to her knees by one of Colonel Jan's rebels, who then holds a revolver at her head. Mason is threatened with death by Colonel Jan if he does not give him Venigus. Mason implores Venigus to come out, and he does, followed by a horde of citizens, who encircle Colonel Jan's team and Venigus himself, sporting a smug expression. Since Colonel Jan and his soldiers are surrounded and helpless, the three quickly make their way out via a covered door. While Clare is filming, the group breaks into Georgi's office in the Venigus palace. When the rebels get what they want, Venigus warns Georgi that they will just get rid of him. The two hug as Venigus vows to defend George from the rebels. Venigus tries to have a civil talk with General Martinez as he walks into the room, but the general draws a revolver and kills Venigus. As Venigus draws his weapon and kills General Martinez, Mason reaches out to seize Clare to protect her. After assisting Venigus in getting up, Mason removes the bullet from Venigus' suit and informs Mason that he is wearing a bulletproof vest. Their happiness is fleeting, however, as they learn George has been shot. As his nephew passes away in his arms, Venigus cradles George and weeps. Troops from Punia barge into the room and start shooting weapons at Venigus. Speaking with the troops, Venigus assures them that he is not the enemy and that he shares their desire to aid his people. Colonel Jan's rebels move carefully toward the chamber, keeping close to the Punia troops. Venigus gestures to the rebels as he concludes his speech, and the Punia troops turn and engage in gunfire with the insurgents. Behind a desk, Mason, Clare, and Venigus take cover as Clare continues to record everything. Inside the palace, there is a battle, and Mason makes careful to protect Clare and even Venigus. While the Punia troops and the remaining rebels are engaged in combat, Colonel Jan and one of his men pursue the three. Mason remains behind to fight Colonel Jan, giving the order for Venigus and Clare to go first. Mason learns that Colonel Jan, not Venigus, killed his friends as Colonel Jan ties him to the ground. Colonel Jan struggles and is about to stab Mason to death when Clare shows up and takes him out cold. After that, the two go to Venigus, where the rebels are outnumbering the Polonia troops. Mason drops to the ground, seizes a gun, and starts shooting at the rebels. Clare is still filming as Venigus and Clare are both gazing at him in shock. Driving through the gate, Sebastian and his men enter the palace. They help Mason and the troops from Punia beat the rebels who are escaping. Now that the conflict is over, everyone knows the whole truth about Venigus and Punia thanks to Clare. The palace is back in working order, and Venigus can now share his narrative with the world. Prior to the interview, Venigus expresses gratitude to Clare and Mason for their support, particularly to Clare, who enabled the world to see the reality. The interview starts and is aired globally. Mason's wife and daughter welcome him home from work in Punia with open arms. One day, Mason gets a text from Venigus telling him that he gave him a tiny present. Mason discovers to his amazement that a substantial amount of money has been deposited into his bank account. The story concludes with Mason grinning as he heads back to his vehicle, where his wife and daughter are waiting. He extends an invitation to them to spend the rest of the day with his happy family.